All right, guys, excited to have another special guest with us today. Comes from the Texas Hill Country. He's got 3 books already out there. Got another one coming up next year. Real excited to talk to James Wade. And first off, James, privileged to see you face to face this morning.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you for having me. This would be what would be called a long time first time in your business, right? I've liked your show for a while now. An acquaintance of mine, you had on Jesse Dayton.
Yeah.
And I want to say that was like maybe November of 21 or something. Yeah. And so, I heard that episode thanks to Jesse. And then the first thing I did was run to your back catalog and like just listen to, try to listen to everything you've done, which is quite a task because you've done a ton, man. So I appreciate you taking the time to have me.
Yeah, I was. I remember I was scrolling through Instagram one day and I saw you talking about the new book, Hollow Out the Dark, and I remember reaching out to you. I was like, "Hey, who do I reach out to about this?" And you're like, "Hey, let's just make this happen." So I'm excited to talk today.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. I feel like my publicist and my publisher have enough on their hands, and I was like, I've been following Cameron for a couple of years now. I was like, let's just make it happen on our own. Cut out the middleman.
Now, James, tell me, where did the love of reading, writing was there as soon as you started reading as a little one? Was there ever any looking back, if you will?
I mean, in a sense, there were some, I guess, like stopgap moments. I've always, been a reader, loved reading when I was younger. I would write little things that were silly, Indiana Jones fan fiction or something, all throughout like school. But as I got a little older, I grew up in East Texas and a rural area in the state. And I didn't have that, people talk about like representation and all that. And I didn't have anybody in my area that was a real life author, right? And so I didn't have that to kind of go, oh, well, this guy or this gal made it, and maybe I could ask them questions or whatever. And so the publishing industry was just, I don't know, it just felt like something that only happened in New York or something like that. And so I kind of pivoted in high school to journalism. And, I was young and idealistic, and I was convinced journalism was going to, save the world. And so and it was also a way to continue to incorporate the writing though. Right. And so I followed that path for a little while through college, and then ended up doing some kind of political writing and work here in Texas for water conservation and other infrastructure stuff. And all of that was great. But at some point, I want to say about 7 years ago or so, my wife, who was in real estate in Austin at the time, which was great but hectic, she said, I'm burned out. You're burned out. We're still young enough to do something really, really dumb. So why don't we basically, give away most of our stuff and hit the road? And so we did just that. We kept a small, like closet-sized storage closet for kind of some of our, more sentimental possessions, but for the most part, we just donated most of what we owned. We sold our cars and bought an old beat up Nissan to pull a 144 square foot camper. And we took off, traveled the country for 2 years. And during that time living out in National Forest, Bureau of Land Management land, basically all the excuses that I had for years of like, well, I can't write a novel, I don't have time, those went away. And my wife reminded me of that. It's just like, you have time now. And so that's how I kind of got back into to writing fiction, and was very fortunate in that the first book I ever wrote, the first manuscript I ever wrote was picked up by a literary agent there in New York, and led to a 3-book publishing deal. And the career's just kind of gone from there. And I feel very fortunate. I mean, I know it doesn't happen like that for everybody in this business. And I've certainly paid some dues, but I feel like I kind of made out like a bandit a little bit, because I don't think I've taken quite all the lumps that I'm supposed to, at least not yet. I feel like they're out there and they're coming. So you just got to stay steadfast. But yeah, reading had always just been something that anchored me, both, my mental health, my outlook on life. I've always been very impacted by what I consider classic literature and really good writing. And so now that I get to kind of be a part of that, even if that from a very far distance, it's just it's a privilege, man. It's an absolute privilege to do what I do. And even though I shouldn't complain, I still do, but I maintain some gratefulness in there as well.
And you talked about how it helps your mentality, the writing, and the psychiatry of your own brain as well. How do you find yourself changed at the end of a work? Do you notice a different you from the beginning of a project to the end?
That's a great question. I think the answer's got to be yes in terms of the change, because we're always changing and evolving, shedding the skin, so to speak. And yeah, I think each new project I go into, it takes me, I don't know, but somewhere between a year and 2 years to write a novel. And so obviously there's going to be a lot of life change that happens during that course. And there's going to be things that I read and things that I learn in the research of the book, or even something completely outside of the project that's going to kind of change who I am, even if it's just to a small degree. And you can't help but see that reflected in the characters, in kind of the language that's being used. There were books that I wrote before I had children and books that I've written since, and I can see the change in the way that I treat the parents or treat young children in terms of on the page. There's more richness there because I have that experience, right? And I think that's a huge part of it. Is it's really tough, at least for me. I don't want to speak for all writers, but it's really tough for me to write things that I haven't experienced in some form or fashion. And that's not to say that you can only write what you know, but there's got to be at least some touch of something, something that you can latch onto to make it feel real to you. And to your point, I've so much of what I've written has been absolutely the old adage of like, this is cheaper than therapy. It's been me, I'll take something that I have always questioned or something that is bothering me about whether it's my life or the world in general, purpose, existence. I mean, we could go from big to small, and I'll try to work that out on the page a little bit. And just spoiler alert, there aren't usually answers, right? Like that's not, right. I don't write and then have some epiphany that's like, oh, this is the answer and now I feel fine. But in kind of pawning my problems off onto my characters, or onto readers even, it's certainly that feeling of you're not alone. I think it was Fitzgerald who said that, reading and writing, like when you read a good novel, it really impacts you when you see all of your concerns and all of your different feelings or thoughts you may have had that you thought were only your own, and you see them reflected and you go, oh my God, I'm not alone, right? Like these are universal problems. And even if people don't speak about them, out in the open, like here it is right here in this novel, this writer understands how I'm feeling. And so I try to do that as well. So it's like my own therapy, but then I also hope that when somebody does pick up the book, there might be something reflected in it that they're going to latch onto, even if it's just a paragraph, a page, a sentence, whatever. I mean, that's, to me, like I've read entire novels that even if the entirety of it didn't resonate with me, there might be a few things that are really magical and makes it completely worth it.
Yeah. Now for you, the hill country of Texas, how cool is it for you to put that out there in the storylines? And also, what do you think is making Getting Out and Away so popular today? I mean, Yellowstone, you got the 1883s, and it just seems like everybody wants to get away from the big city these days, right?
Yeah, it's wild, right? It's, it's kind of the inverse of what we saw kind of in the 20th century where everyone flocked to the cities. Now we have, and I think a lot of it has to do with disruptive technology, just like anything else. People have the ability to work from home a lot more now, and so they're not beholden to a single location. I think there's a lot of nostalgia out there, even nostalgia for folks that might not have ever actually experienced it, right? Like, I do this all the time. I'll watch a movie from like the 60s or 70s and I'll see, like leaf covered streets, with these old classic cars lined up and down. And like, all of a sudden I get this strange feeling of like, oh, I wish I could go back there, but it's
Right.
like, wait, I've never been there, you know? And so I think that plays into it a little bit. And without getting too far into like just evolutionary, you know, like diatribes, I think that just humans, we want to move around, and we're always searching for that kind of next last frontier. You know, I have a little bit of land down in Terlingua, Texas, that my wife and I were able to snatch up several years ago, and it's a good thing we did, because there's no way that we could get it now, because that was in Texas. That's kind of one of those last frontiers where it's, you know, a lot of people are going down there and realizing like, oh, this is really cool, and it's isolated, and it's, you know, it's beautiful, and there's no one here, and so they move down there, and of course, eventually that'll, you know, years from now, that'll become a very crowded place. And, you know, we tend to kind of do that as humans, right? We all flock to the thing where nobody is, but now everybody's there. And so it's kind of a self-defeating prophecy, if you will. But that being said, I can't knock anybody for wanting to get out into nature, and where we are here in the hill country is absolutely beautiful. We lived in Austin for years, and there's a ton I love about Austin, but, you know, we wanted to raise our kids where, you know, they could run around and be feral children in the backyard, and you know, a slower pace of life, not near as much traffic. And but in that same breath, a lot of people have that same idea, right? And so we're seeing, you know, there's probably twice as many people in kind of the little ranch neighborhood that we live in as when we moved here just 3 years ago. So, and that's okay. I don't ever want to be one of those bitter people that are like, it's not what it used to be, because I think that without change and progression, places die. You know, like I said, I'm from East Texas, and, you know, there are plenty of towns there that just kind of wanted to stop people coming. And so they did. They stopped. And guess what happens? You know, when you don't have people moving in, that infrastructure dries up, the tax dollars go away, and all of a sudden it's a ghost town, you know. And so I think we have to move to survive, man. We have to keep pushing ourselves in some form or fashion, whether that's physically moving or whether that's learning and growing as a person. I mean, I just think you have to stay, energy in motion stays in motion, man. And that's kind of, I have to remind myself of that sometimes. Sometimes it gets, you know, you get cozy, you get a little lazy, and it's like, hey, man, you need to get up and you need to do something right now. So.
Now, how hard was it for you as after all things Left Wild was out there and you got the feedback? I mean, was it hard for you to accept the feedback when you saw yourself, or had you already clicked the switch over to away from journalist to author? I mean, mentally.
Yeah, you know, that's another great question. I'm starting to pick up a pattern here that kind of flows with the name of the show. It was interesting because, you know, I had written several, you know, I'd probably written hundreds of articles as a journalist, and you have some people comment on those and you get a little feedback, but you're never really, at least if you're a halfway decent journalist, you're never the center of attention there, right, whether it's good or bad. Somebody might say it was a nice piece or whatever, but really you're just reporting a story. And so I knew going in with All Things Left Wild that whatever the feedback was going to be, positive or negative, I was going to need to be ready for that. Because, you know, I always tell people, pick your favorite book, right? Like, of all the books in the world, what is your favorite read? Go to Goodreads or go to Amazon and click on the 1-star reviews and see that there are hundreds, and if it's a popular enough book, probably thousands of people that hate that book. Right, that think that your favorite book in all the world is just a total piece of shit, right? Like, it's just so bad. And that should make you feel really good in terms of a writer, because you're never going to please everyone, right? And on the flip side, if I'm not going to listen to negative criticism, then I also can't listen to positive criticism, right? Like, because how does that help me as a writer to have people saying like, oh, this kid's the next Cormac McCarthy? Like, that's not ever good, right? Because A, it sets an unreasonable expectation, mm-hmm, and B, it could absolutely kind of start to play with your ego a little bit in a way. And I think ego is a very interesting and difficult thing to manage, especially as a writer or any kind of artist, because you have to have a little bit of ego in order to sit down and write anything, right? Like, there has to be something that says, hey, this is worthy of going on the page. But as soon as it's on the page, you have to turn that ego like off immediately, right? And I just think it's easier to do that when you ignore that response. Now, fortunately for me, the response to All Things Left Wild was pretty overwhelmingly positive, in a way that I completely didn't expect. And so there was absolutely kind of a few weeks there that was a shock to the system a little bit, because I told myself to ignore all that stuff, but it kind of got tough on me. And it came out during the middle of the pandemic. We're in a lockdown. I think my daughter was like 6 weeks old at the time. And so like, it was just all of life kind of felt turned upside down, not just the writing. And so it was such a wild and unexpected time in our lives, because, we would get like a feature article or a good review, or even like when we won a couple of awards for All Things Left Wild, it was great, but like there was no one to celebrate with. We couldn't leave the house. So it was just kind of my wife and I were like, all right, cool. Like, this is how it's going to be. And so that was interesting. But to your point, like, I did have to flip the switch pretty quickly, because I had other projects that I owed my publisher, which I think is a great thing to do. Like, I think that's anytime I talk to prospective writers, I'm like, the best thing you could do when you finish a project is start another one. Or the best thing you could do if you're sending out your manuscript to an agent or something is be working on the next one. That way, if you're not even worried about rejection or acceptance, and if you do get a rejection letter, like, hey, it's okay, I'm already on another project, So that's, we try to keep ourselves busy, always having a project kind of in the background and ready to go.
Now looking forward to the 2024 release of Hollow Out the Dark, how much different is James the promoter, if you will?
Man, James the promoter hates his job. I will tell you that. One of the fantasies about being a writer is like, and I'll just sit in my office and I'll write these novels, and then I'll hand them over to my agent and my publisher, and they'll do all the promotion, and I'll just get to kind of slink away into the shadows. I learned very quickly that's not how it works. And it's part of, my wife calls it paying taxes, right? Like, it's part of, like, I'm very privileged to be able to write these novels and to have a home at Blackstone Publishing. And they've been great to me. And so, I'm only helping them and indirectly helping myself by getting out there and paying taxes a little bit. And so when I put that like marketing hat on, it's just, it feels so unnatural to get out there on social media and say, hey, everybody, buy my book or whatever. I don't know. It kind of feels like you're in the middle of the town square and you're hawking goods or something. And it's especially weird because these forums that publishing uses so much now, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all these things, they're used for social change. Like, they're used for actual real life, change in the world type of stuff. And then as an author, you're expected to get on there and go, oh, and by the way, as we fight for civil rights and justice across the world, check out my book, right. And so that feels a little weird. But at the same time, there's so many people that will be quick to remind you, like, that's kind of part of what life is about, right? We fight for these things. And at the same time, we fight for them so that we can enjoy things like art, things like novels and films and music. And that goes hand in hand together. It's all part of the beauty of being alive. And so I try to keep that in mind when I'm out there doing the self-promotion stuff. But yeah, and I'm to reiterate, I'm fortunate because my publisher is so great about this stuff. The literary community here in Texas, especially, is wonderful. They've taken me in over the last 5 years and kind of just really accepted me in a way that I didn't expect, right? Because there's only so much room in the cultural zeitgeist for X amount of novels to do well. And so you kind of think going in there may be some kind of competition. And I'll tell you, man, if there is, nobody's talking about it, because I've had nothing but love and support from the more established authors here in Texas from day one, whether that's giving me blurbs for my first novel, even though, I was they had no idea who I was. And I'm going up to some of these giants like Sarah Bird here in Texas, who's a legend, or David Joy out in the Carolinas, and I'm just like, hi, you don't know me at all, but could you please blurb this novel? And what I found is that 9 times out of 10, man, it's tough to find a writer or a bookstore owner or a librarian or anybody that's kind of in this field that is not just a really gracious, generous person. And I think that's been the biggest thing that I didn't expect, that I'm absolutely in love with about being a writer, is the networking I've been able to do with just good people, man. Like you can look at the world and you can start to feel pretty shitty about it sometimes. And so, I'm grateful to be in a spot where just about everybody I interact with on a daily or weekly or monthly basis just seems like good people. It warms the heart in the corniest, but also just most genuine way.
And to build your faith in humanity the way that the media seems to show that we're so against each other, to be out there and see it firsthand, and then to put that back into your writings. How cool is that to be a part of as well?
Man, you hit the nail on the head. That's nuance, for whatever reason, is something that just doesn't exist, right? At least if you're looking at the media, at least if you're looking at the extremes of whatever side of whatever argument, whether it's political parties or anything else. Like, we've gone so far to the extremes, and you could do a deep dive on, why that is in terms of what people respond to and what gets the most clicks or the most comments and, ad dollars and capitalism. We could blow the whole thing out, but on a more basic human level, there's just so much, we're such fascinating creatures, and there's so much nuance to us. And while it may not be the popular or expedient route to take, I think that slowing down sometimes and really trying to find the gray instead of painting everything black and white is just so beneficial to us as a society. But it takes time and effort to get there. I mentioned my wife and I traveled across the country. Well, we set out, we set out in 2017, right? So we're just coming into Donald Trump's first part of being president. And what we knew is that we were going to see all these beautiful places because, for all the great things about our country, it's the natural beauty here, and the way we've been able to, at least in a lot of places, conserve that is almost unmatched, right? And so we knew we were going to go on these great hikes and see all these great things. But what was completely unexpected and overwhelming was the amount of just good people that we met from coast to coast, and of all different walks of life. And that sounds hokey. If I wrote it, I don't think it would feel like I was trying to be like overly romantic or something. But like these were true things that we encountered. We were invited to a party in McClellanville, South Carolina, tiny shrimp boat community, a little bit north of Charleston. And we're invited to a party there after we met some folks at a bar, and it was a tugboat captain, a duck hunting plantation manager, and a guy who had just gotten out of the Army. And all 3 of them were best friends. They all lived in this house together. One of them voted for Donald Trump. One of them voted for Hillary Clinton. And the other one said, "I don't vote. That's how they get you." And I just thought it was so perfect, because here are these 3 guys that, you could have looked at all 3 of them and expected them to have the exact same outlook on everything, but they couldn't have been more different. And yet they've been best friends their whole life. We met with a lady in Kernville, California, who was an ex-Texan who had lived in California for a while, who had just lost her mom. She invited us to dinner. We went to dinner with her. We met some folks in Lodi, California, who, again, we didn't necessarily share the same political beliefs with, but they were so welcoming, and they still send us Christmas cards to this day. We met, there was a Hispanic family in Casa Grande, Arizona, who we were at the same RV park as them. So we'd come in from out of the woods, basically stinking and dirty. And we'd go to an RV park for a night or two to do our laundry, refill our tanks, all that stuff. And we met this family who was having a family reunion to celebrate the fact that the patriarch of their family was cancer free for the first time in like 9 years. And they're like, invited us to the party. And so you make all these connections, and nobody cares what you believe in, or, what your thoughts are on some random topic, as long as it doesn't displace the human connection, in other words, right? So like, we have these voices on social media now, and it's like, if we don't have a take, if we don't have a thought about whatever the latest controversy is, right? Like this beer or that beer, or this chicken sandwich or that chicken sandwich, like, who cares, man? Like,
Right.
that's so not what makes us human. And when you can silence those things, the way that we were able to, again, being out on the road and being face to face with all these folks, like, that's when the real human connection comes in. And that's tough for me to admit, as somebody who really likes to just kind of, kind of hermit up in the office, and people talk about cabin fever like it's a bad thing. I'm like, no, this is great, man. But I will. It's tough for me to admit, but admit it, I will. Because when you get out and get face to face with people, to me, that's when, like, the real connectedness of humans comes out. And it's when my hope for mankind comes out, as extravagant and dramatic as that sounds. Again, you're here, you're cooped up in your house, and all that you have to go on is, news reports and social media. You're going to think the world is a really terrible place. And in some ways it is. I don't want to go too far to the other side, that everything is rainbows and Labrador Danes, but anyway, it's something that I think we could use a lot more, is that gray area and that nuance. And I try to inject that into my writing, into the outlook of the characters, into, if there's an antagonist, if there's a guy doing bad things, well, how did he get that way? Right? Is he just an evil man? Like, probably not. That rarely does that exist, right? It's all about where you were born, how you were raised, what environment you've been exposed to, and that, by the way, doesn't take away the responsibility of being a good person just because you had a tough time growing up. But it certainly can inform us a little bit as to where people's mindsets are. And so I try to do that with all my characters, and just give them a sense of that gray area, which, by the way, makes for a more compelling read, in my opinion. I don't want to just have the white hat and the black hat, good versus bad. Like, no, I think something that was really successful with All Things Left Wild is we had essentially two protagonists, and yet they wanted very different things, and were kind of throughout the novel destined to meet at the end. And so the reader finds himself somehow pulling for each character, but also knowing, like, at some point one of them is gonna have to give way to the other. And so I think that creates a better experience on the page.
As you talked about the writing process, you said a year to 2 years on a novel. As you take a break from it for a day, when you come back the next day, how hard is it to pick up? Do you have days where you're just like, let's just start all over?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, yes. And any writer that tells you different, I would question them so hard. For me, I might write something on Monday and think it's not bad, and on Tuesday I think it's awful, and on Wednesday it's like, well, it's not perfect, but it'll work. I mean, and it's all the exact same thing. So it really is all about mindset and having trust in yourself. But that being said, it's really hard to do. I mean, I had a buddy of mine who was kind of a mentor. His name's Owen Edgerton. He was a writer here in Texas, wonderful human being. And he was talking to me about imposter syndrome, which is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot. And I said, yeah, that's what I have. I have imposter syndrome. And this was before I'd published anything, so it made sense to me that I had that. And he said, oh yeah, I do too. And I remember at the time just being like, what? What are you talking about? And he had recently won a PEN award, which is a really big deal. He won the PEN Southwest award, I want to say in 2017. And I said, but Owen, you won the PEN award. How could you possibly have imposter syndrome? And he said, well, when I won, I was very happy. And for about 24 hours, it sustained me. And then I woke up the next day and I thought, well, it's no Pulitzer. And I can't help it. It was funny at the time. He's a very funny guy, but there's so much truth there because when I was writing my first manuscript, I remember telling my wife, if I can just finish this, I'll be satisfied, right? So many people say, oh, I've been working on a novel for 20 years, or I've been working on a novel all my life. And there are people that want to write books and they just never finish, right? And to me, that's a sad thing. If you want to do something and you never are able to do it, that's sad, man, because you only get one go at this. And so I told my wife, if I could just finish this, even if it just, sits in a drawer for the rest of my life, at least I'll know I wrote a novel. Maybe my grandkids will read it or something. And then I finished. And it sustained me, the fact that I finished, for about 24 hours. And I thought, if I could just get a literary agent, man, that would feel pretty good. If I could just get a publishing deal. And each kind of rung of the ladder you get to, you can't help but want to go a little further. And I used to think maybe that was a kind of a symptom of not being satisfied and that I needed to work on that. But then I thought, much like we talked about with nuance and gray areas, I think you can do both. I think that it's important to always have a goal and to want to strive to get a little further, while at the same time being very appreciative of where you are, right? And so I try to remember that. In other words, there's always going to be writers I talk to who have accomplished more than me, and it's okay for me to strive to get to where they are or go even further. But I'm also very cognizant of the fact that there are writers who are not going to be as, far along in their career as I am. And so they're probably looking at me going, man, if I could just get where James is, I would never want anything else. And I think that's, again, just a symptom of being human and always kind of wanting to reach a little bit further. And in a way, that was already reflected in the writing, because people ask, like, are you happy with this novel? And no matter what the novel is, the answer is always no. It's always going to be no. When you start writing a novel, you have this thing in your mind and you go, this is going to be the one. It's going to be the perfect novel. I have this beautiful idea and I'm going to execute it perfectly. And then a year later, you go, if I could just finish this thing, then the next one is going to be perfect. And it just repeats over and over. It's very cyclical in that way. And that's okay. I think with each novel I write, it gets a little easier to not write the novel. Those get exponentially harder, but it gets easier to accept that it's not going to be perfect. And that's okay. That's a good thing, because it gives you something to shoot for the next time. And so if I ever write the perfect novel, I would probably be terrified, because I don't know what I would do then, so but fortunately I have full confidence that that's never going to happen.
Now, what do you struggle with more? Is it writer's block, or is it being able to stop if you're in the middle of flowing and be like, I've got to nod off, I've got to take a break, or I'm going to die?
I would say for me, it's writer's indecision, right? Like, I have a tough enough time deciding like what to watch on Netflix at the end of the night or something after my daughter's asleep. And so, you really are, I teach some writing classes. And what I always tell my students is both the horrible and the beautiful truth is that you are in complete control. And so, choosing like what the characters do, where they go, what should happen, what shouldn't happen. Those are things that like you could go 1,000 different ways, 1,000 different times. And a lot of times what happens is I will write in a certain direction as if a character had made this choice. And I'll get a little ways down the road and go, you know what? I don't think so. I think that I probably need to go back to where I made that decision and take a different route. And that was really hard the first couple of novels, because you've spent days, maybe weeks, going in a certain direction, and to go back and kind of, basically just erase your work. That again, the ego, right? Like I was like, no, I can find a way to make this fit somehow. But that's one of the things that I've been fortunate enough to learn, is that sometimes you do kind of have to kill your darlings a little bit, and do what's right for the novel. And there's a ton of stuff that I've cut that goes into a file that's way too long now, called boneyard or scrap pile. And you can always, if you love it enough, you can always bring it back for another novel. But yeah, I would say writer's indecision is where I kind of struggle the most because there's just so many choices, and I'm an indecisive dude because I'm constantly worried that I'm going to make the wrong choice, whether it's what to eat out of the fridge or what to watch on Netflix or what to write in a novel. Like, give me the fewest choices possible. And so because of that, I always set out with a vision of writing a really simple novel. Like, you think about something like Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea. Like, what a beautiful, simple text, right? An old man goes out, he's going fishing, he's coming back. And of course, there's a ton of metaphor and deeper meaning there, but the actual plot and the narrative and the telling of the story is very simplistic. In other words, there's not 30 characters and they're all meeting up and there's a huge plot twist and a lot. And so I always say, this is going to be my simple, beautiful novel. And then you start to add and you start to add and you start to add. And by the end of it, I'm just like, what happened to that simple narrative that I had in my mind? Now we have all these things going on. And fortunately, that's where, editors come in and they can say, all right, let's find where we can pull back on this a little bit and kind of make it a little more approachable, I guess would be the right word. And so, but yeah, I just never thought I would be here, to be honest with you, Cameron. Like, I didn't, this was, like I said, growing up in East Texas, this was something that people only did in like a New York high rise or something. I just knew so little about it. And so to be working with professionals in the industry now and to be bouncing ideas off of each other and talking about what would be right for one character or another, it's still, even 6 years in now, it's still so surreal. And so I think that adds a little fire to the creativity side, where I still see myself as the little kid in East Texas, and I need to impress these people and I need to show them that I'm worthy and stuff. And again, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that, if you carry that chip a little bit, that can really work well for you in terms of motivation. Because for me, I think the biggest part of being a writer is discipline. Like, you have to treat it as a job. You have to do it even when you don't want to. It's kind of like going to the gym. If you may really not want to go, and then some days you go and you're proven right. You have a terrible workout and you're like, man, well, at least I did it though. But other days you go when you really don't want to and you have a great workout. And that's the same thing for me with writing. Sometimes I sit down and I would rather be doing anything else. And maybe after 2 or 3 hours and 500 very, struggling words, I go, okay, I did some work today, but I just can't do anymore. But other times I sit down and expect to have a bad day, and all of a sudden something just clicks because you're at the computer, your butt's in the chair, and all of a sudden you really start finding a flow. And if I had said, no, I'm going to take today off, then that would have never happened, And so it's all about being there and forcing yourself to be there even when you don't want to. And even somebody that loves writing like I do, it means as more to me than just about anything in the world. And there's still going to be those days that you don't feel like doing it. Again, that's just a symptom of being human. And so yeah, it's been fun. Honestly, it's been fun to find that discipline in myself where maybe I wasn't quite sure if it existed. I wasn't quite sure if there was something I could be this passionate about, or I could be this invested in. And so it's a little scary, right? Because it's the first time I've ever really cared. I've had a lot of jobs in my life, everything from delivering beauty supply products to being a night reporter to working at the Texas State Capitol. I've done a lot of things, and I don't think I've ever had a job that it really would have pained me to be fired from, say, right? Yeah, sure, of course you worry about financial stuff and paying the bills, but in terms of just been disappointed I don't get to do that job anymore, this is absolutely the one that I would be just distraught, right? If my publisher came in and said, hey, sorry, man, we got, we're canceling your contract or something, and so I have to keep that in mind, and that adds to the motivation. It adds to the discipline, right? I don't know how long I'll be able to do this stuff. This is a tough industry, with film and everything. America doesn't read the way that we used to. Right. I'm not going to change that single-handedly or anything. But while I have this opportunity, I want to try to make the most of it, because it is one of those things that could go away at any time. When a book comes out, you hope that it does well. You hope people like it. You hope there's some decent sales. but you never really know. And at any point, you know, your next book could be your last book. And so I try to keep that in mind because I want to enjoy this process. You know, that way, if and when it does go away, I'm like, you know what, at least I gave it my all. And again, that sounds very cheesy, but it is genuine, man. That's the way I feel almost every morning when I wake up.
That's cool. Now, Hollow Out the Dark, anticipation leading up to this one, and how hard is it for you to take that it's that far away and you're already there's a little buzz about it? I mean, how crazy is that for you?
It's wild. You know, you always hear that the publishing industry moves really slowly, and I was totally prepared to accept that. But like the glacial pace is insane, and yet being on this side of it now, I totally get why. You know, Blackstone Publishing has a great marketing team, and they're like, yeah, we're going to need a runway of 8-9 months, you know, to really do justice to this stuff. And so in a way, I'm very happy, you know, I'm happy they're not just rushing it out there. But to your point, it's like, man, you know, I think I started writing Hollow Out the Dark in October of 21, I guess. And we wrapped it up, like after going through revisions with an editor and everything, we wrapped it up in September or October of this year. And so, you know, to work on something that long and then come to the end of at least my part of it, I'm like, all right, I want to see it, you know, let's do it. But no, it's appropriate to hold out for, you know, for another 8 or 9 months, because that's when the real magic happens in terms of developing some sort of buzz. You know, we were very fortunate that Beast of the Earth, my third novel, won the Spur Award this year from the Western Writers of America. And this is my second Spur Award, and I didn't know this. They told me this at the conference, that I'm actually the youngest novelist to ever win 2 Spur Awards. And so, you know, you take something like that, which is, you know, I mean, it starts to sound like those baseball stats that we hear from ESPN. Like, this is the first guy who's 23 and a half and has 2 left feet to ever go 2 for 4, or, you know, whatever, in a night game on turf. And so I don't buy into a lot of that. Like, oh, I'm the youngest novelist. Well, okay, that could just be, you know, happenstance. But what it does is it gives the marketing team a little fuel there. You know, and in looking further into that, it's like, all right, so I have 2 Spur Awards. Who else has 2 Spur Awards? Well, Larry McMurtry has 2 Spur Awards. Taylor Sheridan, who, you know, does all the Yellowstone stuff, he has 2 Spur Awards. I guess they took the money with them when they got their 2 Spur Awards, because somehow my career does not look like theirs. But it's stuff like that, you know, you find these things, and then you go out to all the industry publications, or, you know, even the big boys like New York Times, or, you know, something like that. And you just pitch and you say, hey, we've got this guy. He's got these awards. He's got his 4th novel coming out. And you just kind of see who bites on it, who's interested, which is a little tough sometimes to take, right? Because you just work for 2 years, 80,000 words, and it might come down to, you know, what this 2-minute pitch looks like, or you know, is your bio compelling enough for this magazine to do a story on you, or for this newspaper to review your book, and is it timely enough? You know, which I write primarily historical stuff, and so it's not always trendy or sexy, you know, to push those books. And so my hat's off to the folks at Blackstone for having to do it, you know, because they have to get out there and sell this stuff, and I try to give them the tools to do it, but they you know, they have their own ways that I think are probably far superior to mine. And so, you know, we've been very pleased so far. And like I said, it's been a privilege, and I hope that continues, and we'll see. You know, Hollow Out the Dark is going to be August of 2024, and hopefully it does well enough to get us to the next book, which is, you know, one that I'm working on now, and it'll always kind of be like that. We'll just keep that one project in our back pocket and have something to focus on. That way, whether sales are good or bad, reviews are good or bad, I can just keep my head down and keep my ego in check and keep at the work, you know, because that, at the end of the day, that's what being a writer is. 99% of your time, you're alone, you're at your desk. You know, that other 1% of like events and award ceremonies and stuff, if you're doing it just for that 1%, you're going to be woefully dissatisfied and unhappy, even if you win those things, even if you have big events, because it's just such a small part of it. You have to love sitting down every day and working on your craft and working on your project. And when I can focus on that, man, oh dude, you just set yourself up for success, because it's joyous to come to work. It's joyous to be able to do this. And then all that other stuff just falls away.
That's right. Well, James, I want to make sure and let our viewers, our listeners, everybody know. You know how this goes. At the end of the interview, I always want to make sure and let our listeners and viewers know where to find websites, social media, all that stuff. The previous books and the upcoming as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The best place to find me is on Instagram. It's the one social media tool that I utilize, and I'm at James Wade Writer. And I try to stay active, and you can always ask me questions, and we can talk writing or sports or politics or whatever, man. Nothing's off limits. And then if you want to join my newsletter or pre-order any of the books or anything like that, jameswadewriter.com is where you can go. It's a beautiful website. I say that because I have nothing to do with it. My wife is the web developer in chief on that one. And she keeps after me to keep it updated and everything. So yeah, at James Wade Writer on Instagram or jameswadewriter.com. And I'd love to hear from you guys. Honestly, like, this is, again, as I just told Cameron, I'm chained to my desk 99% of the time. Somebody talk to me and give me some outside communication. Tell me what it's like out there.
Well, apparently Wrigley decided to make an appearance.
Yes.
So he's been sitting in my lap for a while. I'm sure you've been seeing my earbuds, my earplugs moving around, but Wrigley finally made an appearance. But well, James, brother, it has been a privilege to finally catch up face to face. I'm looking forward to the new book. I'm going to catch the other 3 as well, and be all caught up. And hopefully, brother, before the new one comes out, we'll talk again.
Oh, I love that, Cameron. Thank you so much for having me, man. I love your show. You are a scholar and a gentleman, and I'll be tuning in, man. Good luck from here on out.
I appreciate that, James. Brother, have a great rest of your week.
You too, sir.